The mistress of Velara was known throughout the spiral arm as a woman of impossible beauty and ruthless power. Her throne was carved from crystallized bone, her gowns shimmered like starlight over black water, and her voice carried the weight of command that bent whole fleets to her will. Few dared stand against her. Fewer still lived to tell the tale. She was not merely a ruler. She was a legend, cloaked in mystery, worshipped and feared in equal measure. Her palace rose like a dagger from the surface of a dying world, its spires piercing the storm-racked sky. Lightning flickered constantly in the clouds above, yet never touched the palace walls, as though the storms themselves knew better than to strike what belonged to her. Inside, everything glowed with cold elegance, corridors lit by veins of phosphorescent stone, chambers hung with flowing silks, floors that reflected every step like still water. But beauty could not conceal danger. Every corner of the mistress's palace was a battlefield of whispers. Courtiers schemed, advisors plotted, assassins slipped through shadows, each seeking to test her strength or profit from her downfall. The mistress had crushed every attempt so far, but she was no fool. Power attracted envy, and envy bred betrayal. That was why she kept a bodyguard at her side, not one of her own kind, no. She had chosen a human. The decision shocked her court. Humans were rare this far from their home systems, and among the aristocracy of Velara they were considered weak, soft-boned, creatures of impulse rather than discipline. Yet she had taken one into her service, a man drawn from the fringes of war. Scarred, broad-shouldered, with eyes that had seen too much, he stood silently at her side wherever she went, hand always resting near the weapon at his hip. His name was Kale. He spoke little, bowed often, and obeyed without question. But obedience alone was not enough to earn her trust. The mistress had seen men like him before, desperate, wandering mercenaries who sought coin and comfort in alien courts, swearing loyalty until a higher bidder called. She knew what greed could do, how it gnawed at men in silence before erupting into betrayal. And in her palace, betrayal was never far away, so she devised a test. She waited until the night the storms grew fiercest, when thunder rolled like war drums across the sky and the palace walls shook with the fury of the heavens. That night she dismissed her courtiers early, waved away her advisors, and commanded her attendants to leave her alone. Only Kale remained, silent as always, standing near the tall crystal doors of her private chamber. The mistress moved with deliberate grace, her silken gown whispering across the floor. She approached the sealed alcove at the heart of her chamber, touched her palm to its obsidian lock, and with a hiss of escaping air the doors parted. Inside lay her treasures. They glittered beneath soft blue light, jeweled crowns of dead kings, blades forged from metals no longer found in living stars, relics stolen from temples that had burned centuries ago. Each piece was priceless, not only in coin but in the weight of history, the blood spilled to claim them. And among them rested her most guarded possession, the heart of Velara, a crystal the size of a human's fist, pulsing faintly with inner fire. It was said to be a fragment of the dying world's core itself, a relic of power so old that the mistress's own people bowed in reverence before it. She left the vault open. She did not look at Kyle, though she felt the weight of his gaze as she walked back to her throne. She reclined upon it with the ease of a woman born to command, folding her arms loosely, her expression unreadable. Then she gave her order. "You will remain here tonight, human. Guard me while I sleep." Her words were simple, but the test was in their silence. She would not close the vault. She would not dismiss him from the chamber. She would leave the treasures exposed, glittering, waiting. If his loyalty was true, he would resist temptation. If it was not, she would know by dawn. Kyle bowed, his expression unreadable beneath the stormlight that flashed through the chamber windows. "As you command, mistress." She closed her eyes, though she did not sleep. She slowed her breathing, loosened her muscles, feigned the stillness of slumber. But every sense was alert. She listened for the sound of footsteps creeping across the floor, for the faintest clink of treasure disturbed, for the shift in air that would betray disobedience. For a long while, there was nothing but silence, and the growl of thunder outside. Kyle stood at his post like a statue, unmoving, his eyes fixed on the shadows, but time was a cruel weapon. As the hours stretched, silence pressed heavier. The treasures gleamed in the open vault, each jewel flashing like a star. Gold reflected the lightning outside, casting lances of brilliance across the chamber. The heart of Velara pulsed slowly like a heartbeat calling to be touched. The mistress heard Kale shift. It was a small sound, almost nothing, but her senses caught it. A step, then another. She did not open her eyes. She allowed him to move, allowed the test to unfold. Her own breath quickened, though she kept her body still, her face serene. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, careful. He crossed the chamber, boots whispering against polished stone, until he reached the vault. For a moment there was silence again, stretched taut as a blade. Then came the faint sound of breath, close to the treasures, close to temptation. Her heart quickened. Would he reach for them? Would his calloused hand close around the heart, greedy and desperate, thinking she slept? Would he betray the vow he had sworn so easily when he first knelt before her? She waited. The silence dragged on, broken only by thunder. Then she heard the faintest sound, not the clink of jewels disturbed, but the hiss of steel sliding free. Her eyes snapped open. Kale stood at the edge of the vault, weapon drawn, his broad shoulders tense, his stance low and ready. His gaze was not on the treasures, but on the shadows high above, near the carved beams of the chamber ceiling. There, hidden from her sight until now, a figure clung to the stone, an assassin, cloaked in shimmering fabric that bent light around its body. The intruder had been waiting for her to sleep, waiting for her guard to fail. Kale's shot rang out like thunder itself. Energy crackled through the air, striking the assassin square in the chest. The body dropped, cloak unraveling, landing hard on the chamber floor. The stench of burned flesh filled the air. The mistress sat up slowly, her silken gown pooling around her like liquid shadow. She regarded the human with narrowed eyes, her pulse still quick from the tension of her own trap. "You knew," she said softly. Kyle lowered his weapon, holstering it with practiced calm. "I suspected. The vault was too obvious. It was bait." "Not for me!" His eyes flicked to the smoldering corpse. "But for whoever else might be watching." The mistress rose, every inch of her body a portrait of elegance and danger. She circled him slowly, her gaze lingering on the weapon still warm in his hand, on the treasures untouched behind him, on the corpse he had slain without hesitation. "You resist temptation, then?" she murmured, her voice carrying both amusement and something sharper. "But do you resist because you are loyal, or because you are clever enough to know that stealing from me is death?" Kyle did not flinch. His scarred face was unreadable, but his voice was steady. "I was hired to protect you. That means from assassins. That means from thieves. Even if those thieves could be me. My oath doesn't bend, mistress. It holds." She stopped before him, close enough that the faint scent of metal and storm clung between them. Her eyes locked onto his, unblinking. For a long moment, neither moved, and the storm outside seemed to still in reverence to the tension. Then she smiled. A slow, dangerous smile that curved her lips without softening her gaze. "Very well, human," she said. "You have passed the first test." The words hung in the air like a verdict, sharp as any blade, and Kale, still standing rigidly by the open vault, realized with a chill that there would be more tests to come. The storm had passed, leaving the palace wrapped in silence, broken only by the faint hum of energy running through its walls. The crystallized floors gleamed under the pale light of the planet's moons, reflecting every shadow, every flicker of movement. Kale moved through the corridors with quiet precision, footsteps measured, senses alert. Even after the first test, he could not relax. The treasures had not left his thoughts. He did not lust after them, nor did he covet the heart of Velara, yet the mere knowledge of their presence gnawed at him. Each artifact held the weight of history, the whispers of power long extinct, secrets that could unravel entire civilizations if wielded incorrectly. Kale was not a thief. He was not a spy, but he was human, and humans were prone to curiosity. The mistress's test had been clear. She had left the treasures exposed, daring him to fail. But she had also left a trail, subtle and deliberate, that suggested the vault held more than mere wealth. A faint heat against the floor, a whisper of energy through the air, a resonance in the crystal that thrummed with a rhythm like a heartbeat. Cale knew she had done this intentionally. She wanted to see not only if he would steal, but how he would act under the pressure of temptation. He approached the vault again, hours after the night's confrontation. The chamber was quiet. The assassin had been removed, the scorch marks wiped clean by the palace attendants, yet the treasures gleamed as if daring him to act. Cale did not reach for them at first. He circled the perimeter, sensing the pulse of energy in the heart of Velara, noting how the other artifacts seemed to react to his presence. It was then that he noticed the anomaly. A crown, simple in appearance, yet adorned with jagged crystals that refracted light into fractured rainbows, hummed faintly under his touch. When he lowered his hand above it, the air vibrated, and a whisper threaded through his mind. Not words, but impressions. Memories, perhaps, of those who had owned it before. He recoiled instinctively, yet his curiosity drew him closer. He lifted the crown carefully, reverently, as though touching it directly might trigger some ancient law. Images filled his mind, battles long past, kings slain, worlds burned and rebuilt. The power was not in the crown itself, but in the knowledge it contained. He replaced it gently, heart pounding. Next, he approached a dagger forged from a metal that seemed alive, its surface writhing under his gaze. Cale traced the edge with a careful fingertip. A spark leapt from the blade into his hand, not painful, but electrifying. The dagger whispered of war, of strategy, of decisive strikes that had toppled armies. It was a teacher as well as a weapon. He felt the weight of all its history pressing against him. And finally, he came to the heart of Velara. The crystal pulsed slowly, a living rhythm beneath his fingertips. He felt heat and cold simultaneously, the sensation of life within inanimate matter. It was neither stone nor fire, neither object nor being. It was both, and more. Cale's instincts screamed at him to pull back, to leave it untouched. Yet his hand hovered, drawn by the curiosity that had kept him alive all these cycles. Then he realized what the mistress had truly done. She had not left the treasures out for him to steal. She had left them out to see if he could discern their purpose, to see if he understood the subtle threats and the hidden power within. A true bodyguard did not simply resist temptation. A true protector read the battlefield before it was laid, anticipated danger before it struck. Cale exhaled slowly. His mind cleared, his purpose sharpened. He understood now the mistress did not test his greed. She tested his judgment, his ability to resist not because he feared death, but because he understood responsibility. Unbeknownst to him, the mistress observed. From the shadows, she watched Cale move among the treasures. Her pulse quickened, not with anger, but with something else, a faint recognition, a ripple of approval. He was human, yes, but there was something in his caution, his respect, and his awareness of unseen threats that reminded her of qualities rare even among her own kind. She had expected curiosity. She had expected faltering, perhaps even disobedience. What she did not expect was insight. Cale's hand hovered over the heart for a moment longer before he withdrew it. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the chamber. He did not touch, he did not seize, yet he absorbed every detail, memorized every nuance. That was the mark of someone who could survive in her world, someone who could protect her in ways few others could. And then the sound came. A soft click, barely perceptible, but enough to make Cale freeze. From the far corner of the chamber, a small mechanism had begun to hum, almost invisible, a silent sentinel left behind to catch those who approached. A trap, subtle, elegant, deadly. Cale's reflexes snapped into action. He lunged, twisting his body as a beam of energy shot from the wall, narrowly missing him. The dagger and crown were shielded only by the faint resonance he had sensed earlier. A trap not designed to harm, but to test, to warn, to reveal the skill of a guardian. His eyes met the shadows again. From the corners, he sensed her presence, the mistress watching him, evaluating every choice. And for the first time, Cale felt a thrill unlike fear. The knowledge that he had passed this test without breaking the trust she had, knowingly or not, placed in him. Hours passed as he moved among the treasures, setting minor traps he had noticed in place to prevent future harm. Every artifact was cataloged in his mind, every anomaly noted, every potential danger accounted for. By the time dawn's pale light touched the crystalline floor, Cale was not simply a bodyguard. He was a sentinel, a student of her power, a human who had survived temptation and emerged wiser. When the mistress finally revealed herself, she did so with the elegance of a predator closing on prey. Her gown shimmered in the morning light, eyes glinting with both amusement and appraisal. Cale turned, bowing, though he did not shrink. "You have spent the night among my treasures," she said softly, circling him like a hawk. "And yet none are missing. None are harmed, none misused." Cale's voice was steady. "They are powerful, mistress, dangerous in the wrong hands. I have only observed and prepared as I was tasked to do." Her gaze sharpened. "And in doing so, you have proven something I did not expect. Not all humans are weak. Not all are blind to danger. You understand more than I anticipated." Cale felt a pulse of relief, but he did not allow himself to relax entirely. The mistress was unpredictable. Praise could be a trap. Observation could be a weapon. He nodded. "I serve to protect, not to covet." A flicker of something softer crossed her expression, almost imperceptible. Approval, perhaps, or curiosity. She leaned closer, just enough for her gaze to pierce him. "Very well, Cale. The first test is complete. But understand this. The treasures are not merely objects of value. They are keys, they are weapons, they are secrets that could unravel empires. Guarding them is more than vigilance, it is understanding." Cale met her gaze evenly. "I understand, mistress. I will not fail you." She circled him once more, then paused. And yet, her eyes lingered on him with a hint of challenge. "I wonder, human, how you will act when the treasures are not merely left exposed, but threatened. When the stakes are not curiosity, but life and death. That, Cale, will be the true test." He swallowed hard, understanding. This was far from over. Her trust was earned slowly, in layers, in challenges that tested not just his strength, but his mind, his judgment, his instincts. He had passed the first night, but the mistress's empire was a web of danger, and she was both spider and queen. Outside the chamber, the palace began to stir with the first movements of the day. Courtiers whispered of the storm, of the human bodyguard who had remained in the mistress's chamber all night. Rumors would spread, questions would arise, yet Cale knew that no one would truly understand what had transpired. Only the mistress had watched, and only she could judge his performance. He bowed once more before her, leaving the chamber with careful steps, alert to every shadow. And as he moved through the palace corridors, he felt the pulse of the treasures behind him. Their silent hum, a constant reminder of the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. He had faced temptation, yes. He had understood the hidden threats. He had survived the mistress's first test. But Cale knew, with a certainty that pressed like weight against his chest, that this was only the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come, and the mistress would be watching. And when she did, Cale would have to prove that his loyalty, his judgment, and his courage were worthy not just of her treasures, but of her. The palace had grown quiet since the storm, but peace was never a permanent state within the walls of the mistress of Velara. Courtiers whispered like serpents, and shadows moved where no light fell. Cale patrolled with his usual vigilance, but even he sensed that something was different tonight. The air vibrated faintly, like static before lightning strikes. The treasures he had cataloged and protected pulsed in the background, almost as if they were aware that danger lurked closer than the human eye could see. Cale had learned to read the subtle cues, the faint distortion in air pressure, the hum in the crystal floors, the almost imperceptible click of hidden mechanisms. He moved like a shadow himself, silent, deliberate, always aware. His eyes, sharp even in dim light, scanned every corridor and doorway. For hours nothing stirred until the first anomaly revealed itself. A footstep, soft, almost human, yet altered in ways that betrayed it as alien. He froze, listening. Another step followed. Not two, not three, but a steady rhythm, calculated, precise. Someone had infiltrated the palace. Kyle didn't hesitate. He drew his weapon, a sleek, human-made blade reinforced with alien alloys, its edges humming faintly with energy. He moved toward the sound, keeping to the shadows, his mind cataloging possible escape routes and ambush points. He was no longer just guarding the mistress. He was guarding the empire she had entrusted to him. In the deepest corridor, he found the intruder. Cloaked in shadows, the figure moved with preternatural grace, its hands glowing faintly with energy. It was not the assassin of the first night. This one was smarter, more dangerous, and Kale knew immediately that this was no ordinary thief. The enemy moved for the vault, toward the treasures, toward the heart of Velara itself. Kale struck first. He leapt from the shadows, blade flashing. The intruder dodged, faster than any human could move, energy sparking against the reinforced alloy of his weapon. Kale rolled, recovered, and lunged again. The fight was a blur, motion, sparks, shadows. The sharp scent of ozone and metal filling the air, and then the intruder spoke. "You cannot protect her forever. Human," the voice hissed, alien yet laced with mockery. "The treasures are mine. They will serve a new queen, and you—" Kale's blade cut through the air, silencing the threat before the last word could escape. The intruder fell, energy sputtering, leaving only a faint trail of smoke. But Kale knew better than to assume the danger was gone. There were always more, waiting for the right moment, waiting to test the human entrusted with impossible responsibility. He moved quickly, barricading the corridors, checking every mechanism and seal he had previously noted. The vault, the treasures, the heart of Velara, nothing could be left exposed. Every shadow, every reflection, every whisper of movement had to be accounted for. It was during this vigilance that the mistress appeared. She had entered silently, as she always did, her presence immediately commanding the space. Her eyes glowed faintly with a mix of curiosity and something sharper, expectation. She had seen the intruder from a distance, had allowed Kale to handle the confrontation, and now she watched, evaluating. "You handled that well," she said softly, her voice echoing off the crystalline walls. "But tell me, human, did you act out of obedience or instinct?" Kale lowered his weapon slightly, bowing in acknowledgement. "Both, mistress. Obedience brought me here, but instinct told me how to act. The threat was immediate. Delay would have cost the treasures, perhaps even your life." Her gaze held him. She stepped closer, so that the subtle scent of her silk and something metallic, blood perhaps, or the natural scent of power, filled his senses. "And yet I wonder," she murmured. "Would you have acted the same if I had not been here to observe?" Kale considered. The question was not a test of skill, but of character. "I protect, mistress. That is my purpose. Observation changes nothing. My choice would remain the same." The mistress tilted her head, intrigued. She had seen many claim such words, only to fail when temptation or fear pressed against them. Kale, however, was different. He did not merely follow. He anticipated. He did not merely obey. He judged. "Very well," she said, voice low and deliberate. "Then let us see if you can do more than react. Let us see if you can think human, not only as my shield but as my advisor, my sentinel. Tonight you will patrol not only the halls but the minds that plot against me. The palace is no longer safe from within, and you must learn to guard more than doors and vaults. You must guard secrets, intentions, lives." Kale nodded. He understood, though the task was immense. To anticipate threats from courtiers, from assassins, from the very shadows themselves, this required more than skill. It required understanding, insight, intuition sharpened to a blade. The night deepened. Courtiers, unaware of the threat, moved through the palace, some whispering in the darkness, some glancing furtively at the treasures, none knowing how close danger brushed their heels. Kale moved among them, observing, noting, intercepting small signs of disloyalty before they could manifest. A flick of a tail, a hesitation in gait, a whisper too loud or too soft, each told a story. It was then that he noticed her favorite pendant, left casually on a table in the council room, faintly glowing. Someone had tampered with it. A slow siphon of energy, subtle but deadly. Cale intervened, transferring the pendant to a safer location, rewiring its protective wards. He did not touch it lightly, knowing the mistress had imbued it with hidden defenses that could kill as easily as protect. When the mistress appeared again, moments later, Cale met her gaze steadily. She did not smile. She rarely did in these moments. Instead, she studied him, noting the care with which he handled the relic, the precision of his movements, the absence of hesitation. "You have done more than guard tonight," she said, her voice a soft echo in the stone. "You have prevented disaster." Others would have failed. They would have been blinded by the obvious, by greed, by fear. You see what they cannot. You anticipate what they ignore. Tell me, human. Do you understand what this means? Cale considered his answer. It means that guarding is not enough, mistress. I must protect the consequences of what you hold, not just the objects themselves. I must guard your power, your secrets, your life. Her eyes softened slightly, a gesture that made Cale's chest tighten. And yet, she murmured, there is still something I must learn about you. Not skill, not loyalty, but heart. What drives you to act when no one watches? Is it duty, fear, or something else entirely? Cale's jaw tightened. He did not answer immediately, for the question was profound, more difficult than any blade, trap, or enemy. His gaze swept the room, landing on the treasures behind him, the objects that had tested him, the mechanisms he had anticipated. He realized that what had guided him was not fear, not hope of reward, not obedience alone, but care. He cared deeply about preserving what was entrusted to him, about life, about the mistress herself. I act because it matters, he said finally. Because lives, power, secrets, everything is fragile. And I am human. I can fail, but I will not fail because I refuse to ignore what is important. That is why I act, mistress. The mistress studied him, her expression inscrutable, yet her eyes betrayed something faint, almost imperceptible. Recognition, respect, a hint of admiration. She had expected cunning, perhaps skillful evasion, perhaps obedience tempered with fear. What she did not expect was depth, insight, resolve that went beyond survival. She circled him slowly, letting the moment linger. Very well, Cale, you have proven your mind. You have proven your instincts. You have proven your loyalty, and perhaps more. Her gaze lingered on him, sharp, appraising. Tomorrow we will see if your courage matches them. For it is one thing to guard objects in silence, another entirely to protect them when the walls themselves rise against you. Cale inclined his head, understanding that this was not a challenge of weapons or skill, but of character. Each test the mistress set was layered, calculated, designed to reveal not only his abilities, but the essence of his soul, and he knew that if he failed, it would not merely be his life that was forfeit. The consequences could ripple through the palace, through her empire, through history itself. The night ended without further incident, but Cale did not rest. He continued his patrol, walked every corridor, examined every shadow, and catalogued every object, mechanism, and whisper of energy. By the time the first light of dawn touched the crystallized floors, he had memorized the layout of the palace as if it were his own body. He had anticipated every possible threat, every secret passage, every vulnerability, and somewhere in the depths of the mistress's private chambers, she watched, unseen, the faintest smile brushing her lips. She had set the test, yes, but she had not anticipated how much she would learn, not of him, but of herself. Because in the human's actions, in the depth of his judgment and the steadiness of his hand, she glimpsed something rare, something dangerous, something indispensable. Cale had survived the night, but the true trial was only beginning. The palace was alive with tension, though the corridors appeared calm. Cale moved through the halls, senses sharp, weapon ready. The night had been quiet since the last test, but quiet was a luxury in the mistress's domain. He had learned that every shadow might conceal an assassin, Every flicker of light might hide an intrusion, and every seemingly harmless object could contain a trap. The treasures, he knew, were not merely objects. They were statements of power, warnings, and tests. But the final trial had not yet begun. It arrived as a subtle change in the palace's energy. The walls themselves seemed to hum differently, a vibration in the floor like the distant echo of a pulse. The lights in the chambers flickered faintly, shadows stretching unnaturally, and the faint scent of ozone filled the air. Cale stopped, scanning every corridor, every door, every shadow. He did not have to wait long. From the depths of the palace emerged the true threat, a cabal of courtiers and minor lords who had conspired in secret for months, plotting to seize the mistress's treasures and eliminate the human protector they saw as an obstacle. They were skilled, cunning, and desperate, and they had learned the palace better than Cale could have imagined. But he had anticipated this moment, laying traps and contingencies in the previous nights. Still, their numbers were overwhelming. Kyle didn't hesitate. He moved like a shadow across the halls, intercepting the first wave. The battle was sudden and brutal. Energy blades clashed, walls cracked under the force of power strikes, and the air filled with the acrid scent of ozone and scorched stone. Cale fought not recklessly but strategically, guiding the courtiers into corridors where their numbers became a disadvantage, using their overconfidence against them. Yet they pressed forward relentlessly, aiming not just to take the treasures but to reach the mistress herself. Cale knew that the heart of Velara, glowing faintly in its vault, was their ultimate target. If it fell into their hands, the mistress's empire and perhaps countless lives would be imperiled. It was then that the mistress appeared. She moved like a predator, silent yet commanding, her form both elegant and terrifying. Her robes shimmered with the faint glow of energy, her eyes fixed on the intruders. She did not hesitate. With a wave of her hand, a pulse of power radiated through the chamber, knocking several conspirators off their feet. The courtiers had underestimated her, thinking she was merely a distant figure, a symbol of authority. They were wrong. She was a force of nature. Cale fought alongside her, protecting her flank, intercepting attackers before they could reach her. The synergy between them was instinctive. He had learned her rhythm, her timing, her preferences. Every move she made, he anticipated, covering gaps, striking threats, guiding the flow of battle. The mistress noticed this, and a faint glimmer of approval softened the sharp edges of her gaze. But even as they fought, Kyle realized the true challenge. This was no ordinary battle. The intruders were not motivated by greed alone. They sought chaos, using hidden mechanisms, traps within the palace, and subtle manipulations to divide and disorient the defenders. Cale's mind worked rapidly, tracking multiple threats at once, ensuring that the treasures remained secure, the pathways safe, and the mistress unharmed. At a critical moment, a group of conspirators breached a side corridor, moving directly toward the vault. Cale intercepted them, but their numbers were overwhelming. He was pushed back, struggling to maintain control. The mistress noticed immediately. She did not shout, she did not panic. She acted. A wave of energy shot from her hands, striking the intruders with precision, disarming and incapacitating them without harming the vault. Cale watched, heart pounding as her power reshaped the battlefield. Yet he realized something crucial. Her reliance on power was absolute, but he had become more than muscle or weapon. He was her mind, her anticipation, her strategy incarnate. The final intruder approached the heart of Velara. Cale acted instinctively, diving in front of the crystal, weapon flashing. The man struck at him with a blade charged with stolen energy, but Cale parried, rolling aside, countering with a strike that disarmed his foe. The heart pulsed violently, as though aware of the danger. Reacting to Cale's determination, the mistress watched the scene, her expression unreadable, until Cale locked eyes with her, silently signaling the situation was contained. She nodded ever so slightly, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. With a subtle gesture, she unleashed a controlled pulse of energy that incapacitated the final intruder, leaving the vault and the treasures unharmed. The chamber fell silent. Smoke and the faint scent of ozone lingered, but the battle was over. Cale stood before the vault, chest heaving, weapon in hand. The mistress approached, her presence filling the room like a tide. She regarded him closely, her eyes sharp, her expression unreadable for a moment that felt eternal. "You have done more than guard," she said finally. Her voice was low, resonant, carrying the weight of authority and something softer, almost reverent. "You have protected not just objects, not just power, but me. You have proven judgment, courage, and loyalty beyond any expectation I held for a human." Kyle lowered his weapon. "It is my duty, mistress. I serve to protect." She stepped closer, so close that the faint warmth of her presence brushed against him. "Yes," she murmured, "but you serve beyond duty. You act with understanding, with insight, with awareness of the stakes. That is rare, that is invaluable." For a moment, Kyle could see something behind her eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, of trust. The mistress who had tested him observed him and challenged him, now acknowledged him not merely as a tool or guardian, but as an ally, a partner in the preservation of her power. The weight of the moment pressed against him. He realized that this acknowledgement was more than recognition. It was a bond, one that tied him not only to the treasures, but to her, to the palace, to the empire she commanded. "I understand, mistress," he said quietly, "and I will continue to protect, as I have." She studied him a long moment, then inclined her head. "Very well, Cale, you have passed all tests. Not by fear, not by obedience alone, but by insight, courage, and loyalty. You are more than I expected. You are indispensable." A faint, almost imperceptible smile curved her lips. Cale had never seen her smile like this, soft, dangerous, and yet sincere. In that moment, he understood that he had not only survived the trials, but had earned a place beside her that no other could claim. The human bodyguard had become more than a protector. He had become a confidant, a strategist, a force whose presence reshaped the mistress's world. She had tested him, tempted him, pushed him to the limits of his skill and judgment. And he had emerged, not broken, not corrupted, but stronger, sharper, and more trusted than anyone could have anticipated. Outside the chamber, the palace stirred to life with the dawn. The intruders had been dealt with, the treasures secured, and the mistress's empire remained intact. Cale stood at the threshold of the vault, chest still heaving, senses alert, but now with a new understanding. He was not merely guarding objects of power. He was guarding a legacy, a ruler, and something far more complex. Trust earned through trials that tested the heart as much as the body. The mistress regarded him one final time before retreating to her throne, the weight of her gaze both a command and a benediction. Cale bowed deeply, understanding that his life had irrevocably changed. He was no longer a peripheral figure in her court, no longer merely human. He had become integral, indispensable, entwined with the fate of the mistress and her treasures. And as he returned to patrol the corridors, alert to every shadow, every whisper, every subtle shift in the palace's rhythm, Cale understood that the true guardianship was never over. Each day would bring new tests, new threats, and new challenges. But he faced them now not merely as a hired guard, but as someone who had earned the respect and trust of one of the most formidable beings in the galaxy, for the mistress had left her treasures exposed to test him. And when she caught him, she had discovered something far more valuable, a human capable of wisdom, courage, and loyalty that matched the power of worlds. And in that discovery, both of them found an unexpected bond, one forged not in ease, but in trials, in danger, and in the recognition that some connections could not be broken by fear, temptation, or ambition. Cale had survived. He had proven himself. And in the heart of the palace, under the gaze of the mistress, he had earned his place.